Thanks. I do acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay tribute to their history, their culture and their ongoing contributions to our community. And thanks very much to Search. It's been a great weekend. I've enjoyed it immensely. So our subject is strategic priorities of the left. I certainly find it challenging, having sat here for the weekend and heard lots of good ideas, but to give it a go. I think to start with, we need a little bit of context. I certainly do. And we've certainly heard a lot about neoliberalism this weekend. And for me, that is a really big one. I think it's knocked a lot of confidence out of the Greens. It certainly has been very successful. We've heard some startling figures this weekend. And one that's stuck in my mind is that how 50% of the people of this country control 90% of the wealth. But that's not just the problem that we have with neoliberalism. They have very successfully rewritten the public discourse. And this is what I think makes our situation much harder. They're normalising inequality, and you've heard that so well from Maury just now. So how do we take that forward? What do we need to do? Before I go on to some ideas about that, I just wanted to stay with a little bit about some context. I think with the left, we also need to celebrate our history. And this isn't something about wallowing in the past or thinking of the good old days. Our history is very fine. The great struggles of the 20th century is something that we can be enormously proud of. Often it was small groupings of the left who took forward the great campaigns around feminism, around LGBTI issues, then called gay liberation, around union struggles, protecting the environment, feminism, public education. And that's something we can be enormously proud of. And it's, as I say, it's not just for the history books. It's something that's dynamic that we should be building into our discourse to help inspire more activists. And I think that needs to be an important part of what we work on. Coming forward to a bit of context, and you've heard it raised in different ways, sometimes even in interjections, is about the Labor and the Greens. And there is a Labor, or has been, a Labor and Greens agreement that's now part of history. I'd certainly be interested, and I just certainly don't want it to dominate the discussion, but I'd be interested in feedback on how people thought that agreement played out. And it's something that has been very critical in terms of many of the progressive achievements that have come out of this government. And the big one has been the action on climate change. Let's remember what Labor said about climate change in the last election. You've heard it a million times because Tony Abbott said it many more times than Prime Minister Gillard said, that it wasn't going to happen. It happened because we ended up in balance of power. So there is an important context there to consider when we're thinking about where we're going. But in terms of the strategy before us, I think there is both the short-term strategy and the longer term. Just in terms of the short-term strategy, that is obviously for the next coming 5 months an election strategy. And I'm not sure if you were all here this morning, but if you weren't, I'd very much recommend that you catch up with the speech that my colleague Hall Greenland gave. Hall is the Greens candidate for the seat of Grayndler. And he set out, many people have made reference to it, about the Labor and the Greens working together to ensure we don't end up with an Abbott government, of identifying how damaging that would be. And that's something that the Greens are certainly very passionate about. We recognise the need to reinvigorate a truthful narrative about Tony Abbott and the coalition, identifying that it is a party of greed and self-interest at the expense of the community. That is part of what we need to build into all our campaigns at every moment in the coming months, because what we are facing is so critical. But I think that a great deal of detail has already been given about that. What I would like to spend my time talking about now is the more longer-term strategy. And certainly, like so many of you, I was incredibly inspired by the comments in the speech by our colleague from Greece and how the left is working in that country. But first off, just some general comments. As a Greens MP, I spend most of my time talking to people at meetings, informal situations, informal. And the big message that's been coming through for months and months is that people are feeling under pressure. Under pressure, short of time, how to manage their lives. Cost of living is still a big issue. Job security is still real for people. And even if people have a secure job, they're worried about what it will mean, what the future holds for their children as they see the increasing rate of casualisation. And I think when we're talking about strategy, we need to be addressing it in this context. How do our messages reach people who I think are very sympathetic to what we stand for, but how do our messages reach them? So in terms of the long-term strategy, I would actually like to raise 5 points. Didn't want to get into a shopping list. And the 5 points are not a blueprint in any way. But again, going back to, I learned a lot listening to our Greek colleague, Kostas. And he was talking about how amazing how they brought the left together. And he talked about finding what they had unity around. And I think for all our differences, we do have enormous unity. And the points that I want to make is not just about issues that we have unity around, but where I think they can be themes that we build into all our work. Because let's think, we've had a great weekend, but it's about to end, and we go back, largely working on our campaigns, like around occupational health and safety, maybe public transport, maybe a new childcare centre. And that's great, that's what's important, that's a great strength of us. But we also need the unifying message, and I think there are many that they can be, just to make 5 suggestions. And the 5 are, I'll just say them straight out. Can I get a warning at 2 minutes? Thanks. Diversity of media ownership, make public education the norm, climate change action, fixing up mining tax, and workers' rights. Because shortage of time, I'll give you an example of what I mean. Say you're working for a new childcare centre. In your public speeches, in your Facebook page, on your leaflet, you could have a dot point about how we need more resources for public education. When the children leave childcare, where's their public school? Every child should have a public school to go to. We should include in that about the need to divert money from the public school system from the private school system into the public school system. So we're building those messages into what we're doing. About fixing up the mining tax. Fixing up the mining tax would bring in billions of dollars in revenue, not the skimpy little system that we've ended up with. And that's money that we can use, link with our campaigns for light rail in Western Sydney, more heavy rail system around the country, all the other plans that we know that are so urgently needed to bring greater equity in our communities. We can be building messages in about mining tax when we're talking about that. Again, there's the work. My suggestion was workers' rights, diversity of media ownership, climate change actions. But I think you probably might get my theme about how within our campaigns there's certain consistency of the messages that we bring, which I think would help us as a movement to develop a greater unity and understanding between us. I also wanted to give some consideration to how we actually achieve it, because it's often the how where we have some of our differences. So 4 suggestions there: unity, ideology, organisation and democracy. The unity, I think, is fairly well covered, and I was interested, again, going to the Greek experiences, is how PASOK was seen as a problem. PASOK is their Social Democrat Party. I won't go further into that, but hopefully there might be some questions. Ideology. Ideology is a word that we need to win back. Ideology is used to abuse me, to abuse you, to abuse all of us, to try and quarantine us. Our ideology is so important in terms of our analysis of who and why, of how and why power is exercised in our country. It's critical to rebuilding public institutions and resisting privatisation and the wider neoliberalism agenda. So ideology is so important. Organisation. Now, there's some of the best organisers in Australia in this room, and I pay credit to the huge achievements that many of you have made. Organisation remains our strength. We don't have the corporate money, but we have organisation. These days we have many more tools, but we always need to remember, at the end of the day, it's a face-to-face action. It's real people doing real things that makes the difference. I left to last democracy. I think when you consider where the left is at, where society is at, our internal democracy in our organisations is the most important. Firstly, to my mind, that's what's critical in society. Our society is not like about a few of us coming up with good ideas about how to make our society more equal. It's about people themselves engaging in it and making the change. We need to inspire the next generation of activists and win voters, and I see the democracy as critical for that. Organisations without an active membership will see a power shift to the centre, and that's what we can resist with greater internal democracy. So the left has played a key role in the great social and environmental movements of the 20th century. The 20th century. The 21st century is beckoning fast. Is beckoning fast. So we are a critical part of those social movements, those movements to protect our environment. The Greens are passionate about being part of those movements. I do think there's greater opportunities for us working together, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.